The morning sun filtered lazily through the sheer linen drapes of the Windsor Hale estate in Montecito. It was a slow Californian morning, the kind where silence seemed intentional. And yet, behind that peace, something quietly boiled. Leo Windsor, once the golden-haired prince of the British monarchy, now simply Leo to the California locals, stood in the marble kitchen of their sun-drenched villa. The polished surface of the counter gleamed under the light, but his eyes were fixed on something far less remarkable, a lukewarm mug of coffee. It sat alone, just slightly off-center, and that slight misplacement gnawed at him more than he admitted. There was a time when Serena Hale would have made it for him. She used to know the exact way he liked it. Oat milk warmed, not steamed, a delicate swirl of honey stirred clockwise, and a cinnamon dash if she was in a playful mood. But this morning, the cup had been brewed by one of the assistants. It was just coffee, but also not just coffee. It was a message, subtle and unmistakable. Leo didn't mention it. He walked past the cup, letting his fingers trace the counter's cool edge as he moved toward the sliding doors that opened onto their garden. It was lush, expansive, and perfectly trimmed. A paradise meticulously curated for magazine covers. Yet all he could feel was how loud the birds sounded, how mechanical their chirping had become. He stood still, staring at nothing in particular. Behind him, Serena appeared, dressed effortlessly in a silk robe, phone in hand, already scanning through notifications, emails, invitations. Her schedule ran without pause. Appearances, brand meetings, remote interviews. She barely looked up when she passed by him. He turned, lips parting slightly, perhaps to say good morning, perhaps to point at the untouched coffee. But she was already moving into the dining area, her robe trailing behind her like a shadow he no longer followed. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Serena nibbled on half an avocado toast while her thumb scrolled ceaselessly. Leo sipped his lukewarm drink, swallowing the bitterness that wasn't from the beans. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was practiced. There had been a time when their mornings were conversations wrapped in laughter. Leo remembered those first days in Canada, right after they'd stepped back from royal duties. Serena would playfully toss almonds at him while they discussed what freedom meant. They joked about paparazzi hiding in trash cans, made big plans to build something lasting, something that wasn't defined by Buckingham or protocol. But that spark had dimmed, not extinguished, but certainly flickering. Leo left the breakfast table early. No goodbye, no smile, just a glance toward the garden. Serena didn't look up. She was mid-call now, discussing distribution rights for her lifestyle brand's new vegan candle line. The line had been inspired, she once said, by their shared values. Leo no longer knew what those were. In his study, Leo sat in front of a bookshelf lined with memoirs, some his own, most ghost-written. He opened a leather notebook but didn't write anything. His hand hovered over the page. What would he write? That he missed being understood? That his home, despite its modernist art and award-winning design, felt like a stranger's idea of warmth? He found himself thinking back to the palace. The strict formality, yes, but also the certainty. The order. The knowledge that one's place in the world, however confined, was at least clearly defined. By midday, Serena had left for a photo shoot in Beverly Hills. The car rolled away without her waving. Leo watched from the upstairs balcony, then turned, back inside. It wasn't just about coffee. It hadn't been about coffee for a long time. That night, the villa was quiet again. Leo wandered through the hallways, past the awards and magazine covers that bore her face, always glowing, always centered. There were pictures of the two of them too, scattered like proof that it all once mattered. Smiles captured in perfect lighting, but none from this year. He paused at one framed print in particular. Serena at a charity gala in London, wearing the green gown that broke protocol. The crowd behind her blurred, the spotlight fixed only on her. He remembered that, night. How proud he had been. How he'd watched from the side, champagne glass in hand, heart full. But now that image felt like a prophecy. She had stepped into the light, and he, perhaps willingly, had stepped aside. Later that evening, Serena returned, heels in hand, makeup still pristine. She didn't mention the shoot. He didn't ask. In the living room, they sat in opposite corners. She opened her laptop. He scrolled through old photographs on his phone. He paused at a video of their son, a few years ago, blowing bubbles in the Canadian snow. They had laughed so hard that day. He remembered how she had pulled him in by the collar, eyes sparkling, and whispered that they had done the right thing. And now? He wasn't sure anymore. She glanced at him briefly, then back at the screen. No words were exchanged. Just air, shared space, two empires in retreat. Before bed, Leo wandered into the kitchen again. The coffee mug from that morning still sat on the counter. No one had cleared it. No one had noticed. He picked it up, rinsed it slowly, and placed it back, this time perfectly centered. A small act of control in a house where everything was. Slipping upstairs, Serena had already fallen asleep, or was pretending to. Her back was to him, body curled away. Leo stood for a moment watching the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders. Once upon a time he would have reached out, placed his hand gently between her shoulder blades, whispered something comforting. But not tonight. Tonight, he just turned off the light and lay down. The space between them wide and growing. The empire hadn't collapsed. Not yet. But the cracks were visible. Hairline fractures in the marble of their shared dream. A coffee cup, a cold morning, an absence of words. Sometimes, the smallest fractures begin the quietest destructions. The days that followed moved slowly, but with the precision of something inevitable. The Windsor Hale estate remained quiet, but it was a deceptive kind of quiet, the kind that hangs in the air before a storm hits. Each room seemed colder, more calculated. The grand windows, which once flooded their home with sunlight and warmth, now only highlighted the spaces between them. Leo began rising earlier. He would slip out of bed without waking Serena and take his breakfast alone in the East Garden. Sometimes he wouldn't eat at all, just sit beneath the lemon tree with a journal open on his lap and nothing written in it. He had started to count the days since their last real conversation. Every morning he told himself he would start it. He would ask if she was okay, if they could talk. But the words never left his throat. He'd gotten too used to the silence. Serena, meanwhile, had developed her own rhythm. She stayed up late. Her phone screen would glow against the darkness of their bedroom, her fingers scrolling endlessly through messages from agents, stylists, lawyers. She had built her own machine, and it didn't sleep. Most nights, she would tiptoe into her home office with a glass of red wine and come out hours later with new plans, new partnerships, new branding concepts. One evening, while Leo was brushing their son Archie's teeth, Serena stood in the hallway watching them. She didn't say anything, just stood with her arms crossed, observing. There was a time when she used to laugh at the way Leo sang made-up songs to keep Archie from spitting toothpaste everywhere. But now she only watched. She stayed long enough to see Leo lift their son into bed, kiss his forehead, and close the door gently behind him. Then she turned away. Later that night, Leo asked if she had something on her mind. Serena just nodded once without turning around, and disappeared into her office again. She had her own calendar, her own world. It wasn't anger that filled their home. It was distance. Cold, disciplined distance. Then came the Thursday afternoon meeting. Serena had scheduled a strategy session with her core team, her publicist, her attorney, and a branding consultant she had met during an awards show. They met virtually. Faces, glowing on her laptop screen, all nodding eagerly as she spoke about repositioning her public narrative. She wanted to go deeper into wellness, Not just skincare or candles, but healing, reclaiming, empowerment. She mentioned how she had weathered the British press, the monarchy's unspoken rules, and the pressures of motherhood under a global microscope. The narrative needed a new arc now, one where she stood alone. Not as half of a duo, not as the Duchess, but as Serena. Just Serena. They all agreed it was time to reintroduce her, to remind the public that she had survived, grown, and moved forward, even if no one fully knew what she had been moving away from. While she met with her team, Leo was in a quiet Zoom call of his own, this one less vibrant, more subdued. He had reached out to Charles Winton, an old friend from university, who now worked as a private consultant in family law. Charles, was known for being discreet. His name never made it into the tabloids. That was precisely why Leo trusted him. They spoke for 20 minutes. No dramatic outbursts, no legal terms thrown around like weapons. Just slow, deliberate questions. Charles asked how things had been. Leo didn't lie, but he didn't share too much either. He described it as detachment. He said they weren't fighting. They just weren't anything. Not really. Charles took a deep breath and carefully introduced the term trial separation. Not as a recommendation, just as a concept. Leo didn't react. He simply nodded and said he'd think about it. That night, when Serena returned from a late dinner meeting with a West Coast investor, Leo was already asleep. At least that's what she assumed. But he wasn't. He heard her heels on the hardwood. He heard her whisper goodnight to herself as she slipped under the covers. But he didn't turn toward her. The next morning, Serena asked her assistant to cancel their joint podcast taping. She didn't offer Leo an explanation, and he didn't ask for one. Instead, he walked down the hallway, past the podcast room with the soundproof walls and empty coffee cups. It was their favorite project. Once, built on intimacy and unscripted connection. Now the microphones sat unplugged. A couple of trophies stood in the corner, relics from a past that already felt distant. The media noticed, of course. They always did. One blog reported the episode was delayed due to scheduling conflicts. Another speculated a creative direction. Shift. But the whispers had started. People were noticing. Fewer appearances together. No new photographs. Their charity foundation, Hale and Windsor Futures, postponed a key event without explanation. Questions floated, but no one had answers. Meanwhile, Serena's new branding moves were gaining traction. She had signed with a new agency and was preparing to launch a digital series on female resilience. Her face appeared in a soft focus teaser, eyes closed, hands open, the caption reading, "You don't have to wear a crown to rise." It went viral. Friends texted Leo links to the teaser. Some asked if he was involved. He ignored them. Instead, he took Archie for a quiet weekend. In Santa Barbara. Just the two of them. They fed ducks. They built a sandcastle. Leo didn't post any photos. He didn't need to be seen. He just needed to feel real again. On the drive back, Archie asked if Mommy would be at home. Leo told him maybe, depending on how late her meetings went. And Archie, wise beyond his years, simply nodded. By the end of the month, Serena had secured a publishing deal. A memoir. Solo authorship. No shared credits. She hadn't discussed it with Leo. She had her team handle the paperwork. He found out through a friend in New York who worked at the publisher's office. He didn't confront her. He didn't even bring it up. Instead, he called Charles again. This time, he asked what it would mean to separate quietly, without courtrooms, without headlines, just space. Charles told him it was possible, but warned him, the public always finds out eventually. Leo replied that he wasn't worried about the public anymore, and he meant it. He had grown tired of playing roles, the doting husband, the enlightened duke, the modern father balancing tradition with rebellion. He just wanted to be a man, a good one, a steady one, even if he had to do that alone. That night, Serena sat on the veranda with a glass of wine, watching the horizon dim into violet. Leo stood behind the curtain, watching her from inside. She didn't turn around, and he didn't step out. They remained just like that, parallel lives. Separate orbits, still bound, but slowly loosening. The foundation was no longer cracking. It was drifting, and the empire, their empire, was quietly beginning to reshape itself. It started as a quiet Monday morning, the kind that felt like nothing could go wrong. The air was cool, the clouds above Montecito thin and cotton-like. Leo had just returned from a weekend with Archie at a small nature retreat 2 hours north. The boy had loved the bonfire, the open sky, the way the stars didn't hide behind city light. Leo had come back feeling almost at peace. Almost. Serena wasn't home when they arrived. Her assistant had informed Leo earlier that she had flown out to San Francisco for a last-minute roundtable on mental wellness and female entrepreneurship. He didn't ask questions. He no longer expected explanations. Instead, he had taken Archie upstairs, helped him unpack, and read him a story before drifting into his own kind of sleep. One where rest and waiting blurred together. But the calm didn't last. By noon, Leo's phone buzzed, not once, but dozens of times. He noticed the first message from Charles, short and to the point. "You need to see this." Then came the headlines. Multiple media outlets had broken the same story, all within minutes of each other. A private email, unmistakably from Serena's personal account, had been leaked. Its contents were devastating. The email, sent to her financial advisor weeks earlier, laid out in blunt, emotionally charged language her intent to seek full custody of Archie and begin formal asset separation from Leo. But it wasn't the logistics that hit hardest. It was the way she had written about Leo, cold, clinical, as if he were an obligation, a shadow in her story. She had described their marriage as strategically necessary at one stage, and mentioned Leo's emotional absence as a liability to her brand stability. She had even questioned whether keeping the Windsor surname had any benefit left. Leo froze when he read it, not in anger, not in disbelief, but in a quiet collapse. He didn't rush to his team. He didn't call Serena. He simply sat down on the edge of their guest room bed and stared out the window. Archie was downstairs watching a documentary about sea turtles. The sound of the narrator drifted faintly through the walls. Life kept going, unaware of how drastically it had just changed. The internet didn't hesitate. Serena's supporters and critics erupted into immediate chaos. Some defended her as a woman protecting her future and her child. Others painted her as manipulative, calculating, a schemer hiding behind curated vulnerability. Memes, think pieces, and trending hashtags began piling up. Serena's brand was now under scrutiny, not for its products, but for its principle. Was it authenticity, or was it image? Leo remained silent for hours. He didn't draft a statement. He didn't consult his PR advisors. He barely touched his phone. Instead, he sat with the weight of the email. Not just the betrayal of privacy, but the truth it revealed, or at least the version of truth Serena now believed. He kept rereading one line from her message. Leo was just a figurehead. That evening, while Archie played with blocks in the living room, Leo walked slowly down the hallway and into his private study. The room smelled of cedar and old books, the only place in the house that felt untouched by time. He sat down at his desk, opened a secure browser, and logged into his official Foundation account. Without consulting anyone, he drafted a single post and scheduled it to go live in 5 minutes. He typed slowly, choosing each word with care. When the time came, the message appeared across the Foundation's website and its linked social pages. Every child deserves both parents. No cameras. No courtrooms. There was no image, no quote card. Just text, black on white, like truth stripped of decoration. Within minutes, the message was shared tens of thousands of times. Some praised the dignity, others dissected the intention. But the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't a counterattack. It was a retreat into honor. Serena saw the message on her return flight. She didn't react publicly, but those close to her said she had clenched her jaw, locked her phone, and stared out the window for the rest of the flight. When she returned home, Leo was already asleep, or pretending to be. She didn't wake him. She walked into the guest bedroom, shut the door softly, and didn't emerge until the next morning. The following days brought fallout that neither of them had fully prepared for. Spotify quietly pulled their podcast from promotional placement. Executives cited reputational ambiguity as the reason. Netflix reached out with a proposal to rework the concept of their upcoming documentary series, suggesting a new direction that no longer centered on the couple's shared journey. Brand deals began evaporating. Some companies paused collaboration, pending internal review. Others ghosted completely. Investors whispered concerns about volatility, about unpredictability, about optics. The Sussex Empire, once valued in private assessments at over $120 million in brand and media potential, was suddenly fragile. Financial advisors started requesting separate calls. Shared bank accounts were scrutinized. Lawyers who had once worked in unison began operating from opposing ends. Even the palace responded, subtly but undeniably. The royal family issued an indirect statement about supporting the importance of family privacy in turbulent times. The message made no mention of names, but the implication was clear. Distance. Serena's inner circle began to thin. Some team members quietly stepped away. Others stayed, but with less fervor. Her rebranding efforts hit pause. Public sentiment had shifted, not entirely against her, but into a space where admiration now required justification. At home, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't distance anymore. It was silence, laced with strategy. Leo spent most of his time with Archie, homeschooling sessions, painting afternoons, long beach walks where father and son wore matching hats and collected rocks. It was a bubble of peace Leo wasn't willing to let go of. Serena began sleeping in a separate room consistently. She kept her calls quiet. She started taking meditation sessions in the garden. She no longer asked where Leo was going, and he no longer asked when she'd be back. At one point, a mutual friend tried to intervene, arranging a dinner at a quiet restaurant. They both showed up, on time, polite, composed. They ordered. They spoke briefly about logistics, and then fell into silence. No fireworks, no shouting, just the dull ache of two people realizing that a bridge once built together was now holding only the wind. By the end of the meal, Serena excused herself and left without dessert. Leo waited for the check alone. The story had shifted. What began as a subtle unraveling had now become a structured collapse. And it had all started with one email, one sentence, one truth laid bare to the world. There was no coming back to what they once were. That reality had been printed, posted, and processed by millions. The question now wasn't whether the empire would fall. It was how much of it would survive the wreckage. It didn't end with shouting. There were no dramatic walkouts, no slammed doors, no tearful confrontations under rain-soaked skies. When the end came, it arrived in silence, measured, calculated, like the ticking of a clock finally running out. Serena had been preparing for weeks. Her legal team had tripled in size. Meetings moved from coffee shops to glass towers downtown. The tone of her brand updates had changed subtly. Less about partnership, more about independence. Her stylists adjusted her public wardrobe, sharper cuts, colder tones. The messaging was clear to anyone who had been paying attention. Meanwhile, Leo had retreated further into his own world. He took Archie out of the spotlight entirely. No more public appearances, no social posts. Just the quiet rhythm of fatherhood, the bedtime stories, the nature walks, the slow Saturday mornings filled with pancake batter and sticky fingers. He spent more time at his foundation's offices, working behind the scenes on environmental programs. The team noticed a shift. He was quieter, but more focused, less interested in optics, more invested in substance. They didn't ask questions. They simply adapted. Then came the filing. The news didn't leak this time. There were no insider tips, no whispers in tabloid corners. It arrived officially, stamped and sealed, filed in a Los Angeles courtroom on a quiet Tuesday morning. Serena's team had delivered the petition for divorce. The language was neutral. Irreconcilable differences cited as the cause. But the contents were sharp. The valuation attached to her claim stunned even the most jaded legal analysts. She requested $80 million in total, citing joint earnings, brand equity, emotional labor, and what her team called non-compensated personal sacrifices made during their transition away from royal life. Included in the filing was a full breakdown. Estimated residuals from podcast archives, speaking engagement contracts, intellectual, property rights to brand collaborations, and exclusive custody of all future content under the Hale moniker. Leo received the documents while seated in his study. He didn't react outwardly. He simply flipped through the pages, his thumb pausing on one paragraph at a time. When he reached the end, he placed the folder gently on the desk, stood up, and walked to the garden. He spent the next hour sitting, under the lemon tree, watching the shadows shift across the stone pathway. A bird landed on the railing nearby. He stared at it, unmoving. Later that afternoon, he met with Charles again, not virtually this time. They sat across from each other at a quiet table in a private meeting room downtown. Leo placed the file on the table and asked what the cleanest path forward might look like. Charles asked if he wanted to challenge the amount. Leo shook his head once and said he didn't want to drag anything through the mud. He said he'd rather walk away with dignity than fight over ghosts, and so it was decided. No rebuttals, no press conferences, no strategic leaks, just a dignified response filed with the court, agreeing to a generous but undisclosed settlement that would cover Serena's requested amount through a combination of assets, residual percentages, and structured payments. The legal world watched in stunned silence. There had been no war, just surrender, and in many ways, that made it more profound. Once the filing became public, the media storm reignited. Analysts speculated, commentators dissected every financial clause. Former royal aides gave anonymous interviews describing Serena's ambition and Leo's fragility. Social media split into factions, as it always did. But inside the walls of the Montecito estate, there was only quiet. Serena began packing slowly, not all at once, one room at a time. She had chosen to move into a modern hillside villa nearby, something open and minimalist. The furniture was being custom designed. The interior would reflect her new era. She didn't say goodbye when she left. Instead, she texted Leo a single message, informing him the movers would handle the rest. He read the message and then deleted it without responding. Archie adjusted faster than expected. Children often do. Leo made sure to keep Serena's presence, alive in conversation, never speaking poorly, always emphasizing love, even if it now came from two different homes. Serena began making public appearances again, slowly at first. A sit-down interview was scheduled with a major streaming platform. Trailers teased emotional confessions, soft music, warm lighting. Clips hinted at lessons learned and the strength it takes to start over. Leo didn't watch the interview. He spent that evening reading a bedtime book to Archie. After his son fell asleep, he sat outside under the stars and listened to the wind. In the weeks that followed, their once joint charity was quietly dissolved. The website redirected to two separate initiatives. Her page featured a pastel palette, soft fonts, and uplifting phrases about renewal. His page was stark, minimalist, focused on ecological impact and long-term sustainability. Photographs of the two together began to vanish from their digital presence. Their podcast archives were pulled from circulation. Co-branded partnerships issued press releases about natural evolutions and individual growth. But those closest to them knew the truth. The dream had ended, not in betrayal, not in scandal, but in quiet exhaustion. The Sussex brand, as the world once knew it, had crumbled. What remained were two individuals, standing alone in their separate identities. One, rebuilding herself through reinvention, the other retreating into something quieter, something perhaps more real. Their marriage had once been a revolution, a story of love defying tradition, of royalty rewriting its rules. But like most revolutions, it had consumed itself in the... And now, Leo wakes each day early, still sipping coffee in the East Garden. Sometimes the mug is perfectly made, sometimes not, but he drinks it anyway. Serena, in her new home, has resumed journaling in the mornings. Her assistant leaves notes by her bedside, reminders of interviews, fittings, new proposals. Their lives continue, parallel but unlinked. The $80 million was just a number. The real cost had always been the slow erosion of we into I. And in the end, even empires that start with fireworks can fall to whispers.